like to invite Rumen Iliev from Lunch Hub, Ondrej Bartos from Credo Ventures, Dan Lupu from Early Bird Venture Capital, and Lloyd Waldo from Startup Yard in a panel moderated by our very own Ivan.
Okay, finally we're here. That's good. Let's start since we've started a bit later than planned. I'm Jan Brezeberkan, the founder of Netocracia. I cover yourselves, your startups, and also what these guys are investing in. And before we start with our questions, I'll be trying to grill them as much as possible. Guys, can you introduce yourselves and how do you help startups? Starting with Ondrej, since he was the last to come in.
What? So I'm Ondrej. I run a VC firm based out of Prague, Czech Republic. We invest in the whole of Central and Eastern Europe. In Romania, we've invested into 2 companies so far. And, you know, I'm happy to help. How do we help? In many ways. I don't want to be specific because there's competition, but we help a lot.
Yeah. Our teams house themselves, okay. So, hi guys, I'm Rumen from Launch Hub. I'm based in Sofia in Bulgaria. We also invest in startups, like I guess everyone around me. And since the topic is Eastern European startups, this is the region
I think the topic is challenges in developing wearables, yeah. But close enough.
I'll say that...
We're pivoting, don't worry Dan, we're pivoting, it's fine.
Yeah, I would say that I believe in Eastern Europe, okay, so it's, we're going to have our second fund targeting Eastern Europe, so we're going to pour 20 more millions in the next years in Eastern European founders and startups. So I have high expectations from you guys as well. I guess you have high expectations for us as investors, so let's see.
I'm Lloyd from Startup Yard in Prague. We're one of the oldest accelerators in the region. I myself am an American who's adopted Czech as my home. So I would say, yeah, we help startups become startups. Often from just an idea or half of an idea, all the way to investment and to market. So that's what we love to do.
Dan?
I'm Dan Lupu. I don't run, I just help to run a VC fund in the region. We are a 150 million fund investing in CE and Turkey for flavor. And we already invested in 3 companies in Romania, looking to invest in some more. And honestly, I have no idea about challenges in developing wearables.
There are some.
There should be many. I have no idea about it.
There are some, but don't worry, we won't focus on that. So expectations. Well, although the topic of like expectation in Eastern Europe is very broad, and if we're looking at it high level, we have a lot of stuff to go through. But first of all, I want to ask you something maybe a bit simpler. And that's the expectations you have from the startups from the countries you are focusing on, right? So it's Czech Republic, it's Bulgaria, and for then pick, I know, Turkey, pick one. In any case, what do you expect of the startups that you're closest with? Both from a standpoint of what kind of startups do you expect to see in the next year, and how do you expect your local ecosystem to have developed? Just to give these guys a feeling of how each individual country is shaping up in the next year. Who's first?
Okay, I'll start since I was the last one. I think that in terms of expectations, it's about what. If you want, there are some checkbox requirements. First of all, we invest at the stage where the company already has a product, so we are not seed investors. And very important, we invest in companies that can outgrow their initial markets. Ideally, they should launch on a global scale, because we need, just because of the mathematics, we need companies that can generate exits in excess of $100 million. Otherwise, they will not work for us with a fund of 150 million. And if we end up with 40% stake in a company, if we do anything less, it's not going to be worth our while. So our expectation is that the companies will do something which is relevant, at least on a European scale, preferably global scale. and that they have already a product or a service in place which we can analyze and we can understand how and why it's being used by their customers.
So if you're asking what I would say Startup Yard is looking for, we're looking for startups that are working on technologies that don't have a market yet, that are creating a brand new market. So in that sense, very unproven ideas from great teams who can deal with working in a market where everyone, where there are no competitors yet, or where the competition is not clear, and where people are not used to thinking about this as an area of investment or development. So that's kind of our sweet spot, I would say. So especially in recently in machine learning, big data applications, there's a lot of things that have never been possible before. So we look for those startups that are doing things we haven't thought of, which increasingly in Europe, I would say, is harder to find.
So you don't want startups to play it safe. You do want them to go the extra route, to do the next big thing.
We're a seed accelerator, so we, high risk is our profile. Yeah. So.
Makes sense. Rumen, you're thinking very hard. So.
The expectations are high.
Are there any Bulgarian startups here?
So
this is for you guys.
Yeah. Eastern Europe used to be as dark as this room, a few years back. And now, if you...
Oh, what a positive thought.
Yeah. If you just, for the experiment type, let's say Financial Times in Bulgaria or Forbes in Bulgaria, you'll see probably on the first page at least 2-3 articles about the tech scene, about the startup scene, and so on. So there is more light in this dark room, right? But this brings the expectation higher. I would say that what we all miss are good examples to inspire. And my expectation are that those examples hopefully should appear. My expectations are that the startups will not stay in Bulgaria or in this region. They'll follow their customers. But what I can say by experience is that they always keep this connection and link back home, either using it as development office or using some services there. So things are global and local at the same time. But as I said, expectations for me are examples that will become known, right? And this is the biggest expectation we have.
Ondrej?
So the question was about expectations. So let me be a bit realistic here. I expect to see many shitty pitches next
Define
year.
shitty.
Parking.
I expect a lot of taxi apps and parking apps and party apps and dating apps and shit that nobody really needs, either because they don't need it or because they're already there. I expect hopefully several positive events. I really do hope that Rumen's gonna be right and that we'll see the positive, the real success stories. Unfortunately, I believe that we will also see a couple of disillusion because one thing that we are very good at in this region is we sometimes make heroes out of the people who haven't made it yet. And so I expect a couple of those guys to disappear, go bankrupt. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because the whole region and the whole ecosystem is developing. And, if I am to conclude with a positive note, I truly believe that the trends are positive. So I do see more quality. I do see more non-shitty pitches. And I believe, and my main expectation continues to be that I believe that the Central and Eastern European entrepreneurs keep learning.
What would you, just to go off script for a bit, what would you expect a good startup, in your opinion, to have or be? What's your criteria as compared to maybe a couple of years ago, or are there any general trends?
The basic criteria stays the same, right? So it's very much around the founding group, team. What we need to see is passion. We need to see ambition. We need to see competence, and we need to see, problem solving. We are not the kind of an investor that would invest into another, taxi app just because we feel that we might, in an arbitrage kind of a operation make money. We really want to invest into things that make a difference, are ambitious, not just in monetary gains, but in the value brought to the users, to the society, if you will.
And that ambition of profile has changed. The profile of that ambition has changed, I think, in recent years. So I think startups that were working on local projects, we invested in startups that were working on projects only in our ecosystem. But that was ambitious at the time, right? If nobody had ever thought, in Prague 10 years ago, you couldn't get pizza delivered. We invested in a delivery platform that got bought for 10 million euros from Delivery Hero in Germany. We wouldn't invest in something like that again.
The amount was undisclosed, Lloyd.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you can keep a secret, right?
Someone taking notes, right? Thanks.
For an undisclosed amount.
Luckily, there is no media in the room.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. So that happens, So for an undisclosed amount, but the point is we wouldn't do that again because what is the ambition of the second one, right? After that exit, it's different, right? Then they want to be like them. And I wanted to respond to something that Ondrej said, which I think is very true. As an American who's adopted this culture, I speak Czech with my family. There's a big difference between American startups and European startups in this way that especially in Eastern Europe, we think people are successful if they look successful, right? Nice watch, nice car. It's true, right? In America, we think people are successful when they don't look successful, right? When they're living in a garage and working hard and not combing their hair. Right, so Mark Zuckerberg, right, living on a futon when he had billions of dollars, like that was a real thing. That's what we expect. So I'm not saying that that's good, right? But we have to have some moderation. And Ondrej's right. There's plenty of seemingly successful people who are not really that successful.
I think it's a matter of perception. This about who's successful or not. But I think what's starting to come out of the region is that we are seeing more and more companies addressing deep tech problems. So we are seeing this from Bulgaria to Turkey to Romania. And this is, I think, because people understand that they have access to the market and they are not afraid to tackle the deep tech problems. Because these are the ones that are most likely to yield good companies and companies that can be relevant on a global scale, and I expect this to happen in the future. And it should happen more because now funding is more available, and that's why I'm here. That's why Ondrej is here, to let people know that funding is available. A couple of years back, people were still not fundraising because they imagined there is no funding, and although it was, but still perception matters a lot. So there's a lot of people that are not part of the conference circuit, so they don't show up to any conferences. There are people that do not have local clients because their tech is much deeper than the local market requires. And those people, we need to reach out to those people. And I'm happy to fly over to any country in the region to meet such founders. And I think if they should proactively understand who can provide funding and reach out, because everybody is fairly available. I mean, we are not gonna ask for 5 years business plans or stuff like this. We even invested in companies that had no presentation, and I think there's a lot of misconception in terms of what do you need to do in order to get funding, and there's a gap between the reality and the expectations. And a lot of people think that they are successful if they raise from US. That's a tough job if you are not there. If you are there, it might be easier, but you are here. And you are going to be here for at least the next 2 years if nobody knows about you. And you need to be proactive, understand who can fund you, understand what kind of market you address, how much money do you need, and reach out.
So you mentioned deep tech. One thing that we've always had a problem in Eastern Europe, it seems, at least for past years, is we have the tech, we have the developers, we have the technology to build it, but we don't have the marketing, the biz dev, the UX, and so on. And things have changed. Do you expect that in 2017, you'll expect startups to know their shit in terms of business?
No. Things have not changed. I bet that if there is a polling here of all the startups, most probably at least 80% of the people here are engineers. And I had a conversation at a seed camp event with somebody, and we were looking in the room, and there were 95% of the people in the room were engineers. This is not going to change because there is no deep pool of resources from successful companies that are moving from their initial success to startups. So no, we do not expect people to come up with polished presentations and to have a deep funnel analysis and a clear strategy about how to acquire customers. But we understand the products, we understand the markets, and we understand their challenges, and we can help them. We can help them with moving to US. We can help them with their first hires in US. We can help them with advisors on the ground if they need to do that. But we can all do it all from here. It's not easy because there are not enough people, and you might need to hire and open an office in London, or you might have to move to Berlin in order to get the people. But it's much better to have the problem of not being able to market or not being very good at marketing something very good than being very good at marketing something very shitty.
But I agree, it hasn't changed, and marketing and biz dev and sales is probably never going to be the competitive advantage of this region, but that doesn't matter. I mean, it's so much better that our competitive advantage is in technology, because take a look at Silicon Valley. You can't buy high quality talent, engineering talent. Take a look at Central and Eastern Europe. You can buy sales and marketing and biz dev expertise. So, enter VCs, myself mainly, and, you can buy a great sales guy. You can do a global search, and you can even convince very excellent, superior people to go work for a very solid deep tech startup in the region. I've seen it. I swear to God.
I think it's a false dichotomy. I've been hearing this for years, right? Ever since I've been in this business. They're good engineers, but they're not good at selling. It's like, well, okay, actually go to Silicon Valley, meet with some engineers, and tell me how good they're at selling. They're not. But they have access to the talent, right? The talent is here also. But they're working in different industries. They don't want to work in startups, right? So they haven't been attracted to it yet. But they're there. They're creative people here. Yeah, I mean, they make movies, and they're in theater, and they're in advertising agencies, and they're writing songs. I mean, every country in Europe has this, almost every country has this self-sustaining culture, which Americans don't have, by the way, right? That's why.
In what sense?
Well, we don't have regional culture in the same sense of Europe, right? We don't have our own languages. We don't have a defense against everything becoming Hollywood and Disney and McDonald's, right? Europe does, and that means there are a lot of very creative people with very unique skills in every market. It's just that they don't have the idea of working for startups. They don't see that as a way to be creative. But, so they're there. They're not involved yet. But this dichotomy of like, oh, the Americans are good at selling. Well, I think that's crap.
It's a matter of us shifting them from creative industries to this specific
there's
creative
plenty.
industry.
There's plenty of people in Europe.
Get a couple of billion-dollar exits and a bunch of rich people, and I bet a lot more marketing and sales people will start to love tech.
You got plenty of talented people, exactly, who are working in film and theater and everything else, and they would gladly work in tech if there was money,
So, maybe, it's a matter of perception, right? Every country thinks that they have the best developers, and regarding the sales and marketing and business people, we have a problem. That's true, and the problem is simple. What is the perception of success, and what would you need to be successful? If I can put it simply for the guys in the room, would you like to be the most skillful guy in bed or to be known to be the most skillful guy in bed, right? So what's better? And if you cannot be known to be the most skillful guy in bed, and you are, actually you have a problem, yeah? Because this is how the world functions. So it is how it is. I still believe technical talent also emigrates because there are no unemployed developers. I believe we as VCs, we try to help as much as we can and to open this access to development talent, to marketing talent and so on, as much as we can. But the startups as such, they need to be closer to their clients and customers to do business. So it's a natural tendency that they'll hire those marketing and business people predominantly outside of the region, closer to where they make sales.
Okay, so logical, for example, location for that would be London, and we mentioned London a number of times. Some of your startups do have offices in London, and if we just look at one Twitter profile, that one of Mike Butcher, and see what's happening there, is going to be, of course, Brexit. Having in mind that the UK and London have been leading the way as far as investments go across Europe and have been a natural hub for a lot of startups from Romania, Croatia. Oh, if we're starting an office to start our global expansion is going to be London, will Brexit change that? Should these startups, when they're thinking of where should we open our offices, be thinking London, Berlin, going to New York or the Valley directly? Does Brexit change anything? What are your expectations in that sense?
There are two reasons to move to another place. One is availability of talent, employees, whatever they be, programmers or sales and marketing people. And second is the market. So if it's for the first reason, then London will still be there. Most probably a lot more people than here will be available there with the right skill set. If it's about the markets, we need to sit and wait. Whether if you sell to banking, will banking migrate to Frankfurt? I don't know. If not, you still need to go to London. It's not an obvious.
It's not just a simple question, basically. Yes.
Well, this question is predicated on like a hard Brexit scenario. Some of us don't believe that that's actually going to happen. I would be very surprised. I know that it's a negotiative tactic for Theresa May and Angela Merkel both to say, you know, it's going to be my way or the highway, but ultimately there's going to be a compromise. Ultimately, London and the UK in general doesn't want to commit economic suicide, however much they appear to want to do exactly that. And at the end of the day, they're going to realize that they have to accept immigration either from the EU or from Pakistan and India. So, you know, it's going to continue to be an innovative region. I don't see that changing.
And tech travels well, so it's not a problem with tariffs or with any other things. If the market is there, I mean, just think that rarely we invest in companies that only target the European market, and it's just like selling to US, most probably.
Brexit is bad for startups.
Yes.
The IPO market suffers, so the big companies cannot get money, so they're not buying startups, so the exits from investor perspective suffer, the valuation goes down, the startups sell in UK in pounds, the pounds go down, so Brexit sucks, all right? And I'm just expecting now the Americans to vote for Trump to reclaim the title of the most stupid nation, because the British actually took it, all right, with the Brexit.
Someone's very positive.
I hope it won't happen.
I also thought.
I have two comments. First of all, I still just
Make America great again, right? That's
did
one.
not land at believing that there's going to be a Brexit. I still believe there's a good chance that it's not going to happen because I see it as almost impossible. So if it happens, it was almost impossible. My second comment: I've never thought of London as the universally best place in Europe to go for any kind of a startup. So I've always talked to the startups, and it depends on which space they are in, which stage they're in. I generally believe that there's a good amount of time when the startups can just stay where they are and have probably a bit of exposure to, the more developed ecosystems, like, sending them over to Silicon Valley, or, again, depending on in which space they are. If they're ed tech, it's much more logical for them to be in the East Coast than Silicon Valley and so forth. So I am a believer in ad hoc. I don't believe Berlin, even if Brexit happens, I don't believe Berlin will become the universal, startup place to go. Europe will never be as condensed and unified, and we should turn it into an advantage, not disadvantage. So,
We mentioned the European market, we mentioned the US markets. These are basically, when we talk about the global market, it always ends up being, a startup is targeting the US first, right? And most of the startups, at least that I've mentored here at How to Web, say, we're going to the US. Now, with American tech companies increasingly targeting Asia specifically, so the Chinese market and so on, do you expect that Eastern European startups will also start looking at the Chinese and the Asian market as something to go after? Or will they still be like, okay, US first, then we think? Does it make sense to look at the Far East as a potential market, depending on different industries? Because I haven't heard a lot of startups across the region ever mention, we'll be big in Japan.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, maybe that's an unpopular thing, right? But it's a totally different culture. America has a European basis of culture. I mean, it's much closer. China has a protectionist economy. Maybe it's opening up a little bit, right? But there's plenty of things that advantage their own companies, their own industries. America is still the most economically productive country in the world, and that's not looking to decline at all. So it doesn't make a lot of sense in most cases.
I think, or I hope, many people will understand, but as someone who was born in a communist country, I still have a very, very strong bias against China specifically. And I do understand there's 1 billion people in China, there's 1 billion people in India, but rationally, if I take the bias away, I think foremost it's a very regulated market, and you have to first find a Chinese guy whose parents are in the Communist Party in order to even start doing business.
Well, you have to find a guy in the U.S. that's been to Stanford, that knows.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't.
So I am still U.S. first.
Just think why the U.S. companies are going to China, because most probably they already did what's efficient to do in terms of effort in their home market. And now they see another market which is potentially as big, and they want to go there. But if you look at it's not they are going there because it's easy. It's not easy. But whereas for European companies, it's much easier and it's bigger and it's more available to go to US market first. Fine. If you go to US market and then you saturate the US market, then you should think of China, even if you are coming from Central and Eastern Europe. But that's not the case. So it's normal for companies to first look at something which is culturally similar, or at least something that you can understand. Saturate that market. When you do, that's a great moment. Then move to China.
Cool. Before my last questions, are there any questions in the audience so we don't miss them in the end? We do? Where? Oh. I'm blind.
I think the lights are to make sure that we don't see that the room is empty.
I find the comments, my name is Charles Chongo, I'm a U.S. tax advisor based in San Francisco.
My God.
I find the comments interesting.
See, the ecosystem is coming. The ecosystem is coming.
I find the comments about China and not going to China. For instance, I have direct experience with companies out of Central and Eastern Europe that they tend to have an easier sales proposition in China relative to, for instance, US companies trying to sell into China because there's this factor of distrust. So the ability necessarily to scale into China can have real advantages.
Well, just because it's easier for European startups than it is for American startups doesn't mean it's still not yet easier for European startups to target the US market, right?
I don't know if it's an absolute.
No, it's not, of course.
I mean, because you've got a hellish degree of sophistication in coming into the U.S. You've got high degrees of competition. You just don't, you know, in Central and Eastern Europe, you just don't have high levels of service standards. You just don't generally have high levels of competition. It's the same type of situation in developing markets and environments. And coming from a Central and Eastern European background, I think that can give you a competitive advantage. For instance, Avangate competed very, very well in China against Digital River. Digital River had a really difficult time selling into China. Avangate was in China much sooner than they were in the States. Bitdefender had a lot easier time in China, much more competitive time in China than what they ever had coming into the US market. So, you know, that's my experience. So.
Great input. Any other questions? Or, yeah.
Well, I'm not from here. I'm from Chile. I live in Estonia, and I work for an American company focusing on startups. And I always hear so many VCs here in Europe that they are like, there's talent, there's people, there's market. But then there's no investment, so that forced many of the startups from here to try to migrate to the US, where the access is easier in some way, to try to reach more VCs and all that. How do you see that from your point of view?
Actually, I would disagree. I think in Europe, and specifically in Central Europe, access to capital is now very, very good. And actually the trends show us that it's the US which actually experiences a slowdown in venture capital investing, especially in early stages. And I see just loads of money here in the region. So
I think it's a matter of awareness, because again, even though capital is available, a lot of people do not take the time to understand that there is available, and they imagine it's not available.
No, yeah, it's not like an accusation. I just want to understand, because I speak with startups every single day for work, and that's what I get from them. Like, it's impossible to get money in here.
But this is exactly what I'm saying. That
they're wrong.
I acknowledge that this
time.
is the case. The last 2 deals in which I invested, the guys did not ever try to raise money locally. They did not even try.
And also depends what you mean locally, because, for example, for Croatian Serbian startups, I don't even think they know that they have Credo or yourselves or Startup Yard available. Like, the issue is that for a lot of these, when we talk locally, even when they look locally, they look just in Croatia, and then they don't think of like, oh, like we can raise money in Romania or Czech Republic or whatever. So that might be an issue.
I think it's a lack of awareness, or it's an excuse of the weak. You know, venture capital is not for everybody. You know, only the best ones get funded. And then that applies to this region, pretty much the same as Silicon Valley or anywhere else in the US. There is good access to the capital, but only the best ones will get it.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to find too many examples of startups that were trying to raise in Europe, right, consistently, weren't able to, then went to the US and had an easy time. I don't see it.
And it's also the fact that although availability of capital is improving, it's still very scarce. So most probably people are complaining that they are not all the weird stuff is getting funded at the level that it's getting funded in US or in Western Europe, where even Me Too things are getting funded and are getting funded, and they are getting large investments. Here you need to do something extraordinary to get an investment. Why? Because we already see everything that is coming from the region. And if we do see, why should we pick a Me Too? Because we see exceptional things, and we don't need to go to the Me Too things. Whereas in US, there is 1,000 different VCs that do not have access to the best stuff. So they need to put money to work, and they invest in the Me Too things. They invest in the delivery platforms, in the taxi hailing apps, and so on.
Yeah, and then you get this conversation with a European startup which has a Me Too product. Then they'll tell you, oh, but this startup that does the same thing in the US, they got 5 million. And it's like, well, good for them, you know, when the idiots that invested in them, enjoy, right? I mean, maybe they'll be successful, but that, you know, you're making a case against investing in your company, not in favor of it, right?
If the startups are raising from here in US first, then we have a problem, I think, and we are trying to fix it. We are actually trying to fix it, to be honest. And from the startup's perspective, right, if you can raise from a reputable VC in the States, it makes perfect sense. It's damn difficult. It's really difficult, but it makes sense. And so I actually hold fingers that the startups here will have better access there. I tend to believe that we kind of local guys, all right, we help this because we build connection with the VCs in US. At least we are trying. You said we have a problem. I agree. Okay, if they're skipping us, I agree. But we are trying to be helpful also in this trend that actually they can raise, especially bigger rounds. Because when we're speaking about a lot of money, then probably US could be the best place.
And it reminds me of something I was talking about with Rumen before. It may be unbelievable to some people here, but accelerators like Y Combinator, Techstars, they come to us asking us to help them find the best startups, because the startups, the best startups from this region are not applying to them. Right? Maybe they don't think they can get in, but they're not applying and they're not ready to apply. But they are applying to us. So more and more these investors are looking at local investors as a source of deals. So it's not, you know, I can't tell you how, you know, we have 300 applications last year. Maybe 3 of them actually emailed us, you know, like, hey, how's it going? Can we talk? You know, we're not, yeah, and as was mentioned before, we're not, you know, fictional fairy tale creatures. You can call us on the phone and we'll answer, right? Because we're trying to find really talented, really ambitious people. So show us that you're talented and ambitious. It's not hard to do. Yeah.
Cool. Last question, right?
Hello. As we talked about access to the capital, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of node funds available, and we had the luck to receive seed funding from the Launch Hub to catch that first wave of seed capital for Southeastern Europe. But reality has showed that there is a gap between seed capital and Series A funding. And what can be done in terms of filling that gap? You know, a lot of startups don't have enough of the capital to get to the Series A. And when they hit the break-even points, for some cases, it's not even necessary to get the funding anymore, you know.
Look, we are not here. We are not in US or UK, where you have very clear benchmarks against which to judge the stage at which you are. It's not about seed or Series A. When are you ready for Series A, and when are you not? For example, we have the flexibility of investing throughout all the stages. So we can do pre-Series A, post-seed, we can do seed. Why do you say there is a gap? There is a gap only in terms of readiness of the company to take the money. If the company fits the investment criteria, so if there is a large market and there is something in terms of product or service that we can understand, there is no benchmark that we have which says we have to invest in Series A. We can invest anywhere from 100K to 10 million. And most of the investors here have this kind of flexibility because the universe is not big enough to segment. People do not have to focus on specific stages.
I agree. I don't see a gap. And when you compare the region to the US, you should be aware of the fact that in the US, in order to raise a round, you should have $150,000, $200,000 in monthly recurring revenue. Do you have that? If you do, I very much doubt that you couldn't raise.
Yeah, there's this echo chamber in startup land in Europe where everyone tells each other the same things all the time, every year, as if conditions were the same as they were 5 years ago. But they're not. Every investor on this stage, except for us, invests in that gap that you're talking about. Everyone that I meet does now. Maybe they didn't before, but they do now. Yeah. So, but this keeps going around, right? Like as if it's still true. So, it's not.
Okay, cool. We don't have time, right? Or okay, guys, don't worry. You can ask these guys after now we finish. Thank you very much. Please a big applause for my panelists.